So, a new series, Is That You, God? Is That You, Spirit? I want to share a little piece that kind of sets the tone for this. The man whispered, God, speak to me. And a meadowlark sang, but the man did not hear. So the man yelled, God, speak to me. And the thunder rolled across the sky, but the man did not listen. The man looked around and said, God, let me see you. And a star shone brightly, but the man did not notice. The man shouted, God, show me a miracle. The life was born, but the man did not know. So the man cried out in despair, touch me, God, and let me know that you are here. Whereupon God reached down and touched the man, but the man brushed the butterfly away. I'm mindful as I share that piece, and I don't know who to credit that to, unfortunately, but I'm mindful as I share that piece that we just finished a series on affirmative prayer. And that series is built on the idea that affirmative prayer is on the foundation of the principle of oneness, that there is no separation between us and God, there is no duality, and that when we pray, we are praying from the realization of that oneness, from a non-dualistic state. And here this whole piece sounds like a God out there. And what I'm mindful of is how difficult language is, especially when we're wanting to talk about spiritual ideas and concepts. And so I've come to a place in my life where I have to make space and place for that difficulty and know that even though in a piece like that, it sounds like a distant God, it really isn't. It's about opening up to the realization that there is a presence and energy, and that oftentimes what we are challenged by is that we're not paying attention, we're not present, we're not aware. And spiritual practice is about increasing our awareness. And so for today and the next couple of Sundays, we're going to be looking at various ways that God, spirit, life kind of speaks to us. And today, as I've said, my focus is on that still small voice. Next week, it will be on the idea that sometimes it's as if God is speaking to us through other people. Have you ever had that happen? I certainly have. And other times it seems as if God's Spirit is speaking to us through seeming coincidence or chance. Have you had that happen? Right? I have as well. You know, some of us in this room and some of us online have actually spent time studying and reading the Bible from cover to cover, challenged by it, finding some parts of it that make sense and some parts that don't. And others of us maybe have not had the experience of reading much of the Bible at all. But if we have read the Bible, we know that there are many examples and stories of what seems like God speaking and leading and miracles and so forth. And it's easy for people to think, well, that happened way back then in that time and to those people, but does God still speak today? Does Spirit still speak today? There was a book written by a man that I had the opportunity to meet on one of our synthesis dialogues with the Dalai Lama. His name is Tom Hartman, the Tom Hartman with a very popular podcast and radio program. Tom wrote a book called The Prophet's Way. At that point in his life, he was much more focused on environmentalism. And in The Prophet's Way, he writes this. He says, speaking of miracles in the opening chapter of the book, The Prophet's Way, Tom writes, the prevalent story of Western culture is that all those things happened back then, but can't happen now. And I'm struck by this line. Modern religion is an odd mixture of belief and non-belief. We're told believe that this did happen, but don't believe anybody who says they can do this kind of stuff today. Right? Right? Believe that this happened then, but don't believe that this stuff can happen today. And what I want to suggest is that God's Spirit is very active in all of our lives. It's just that we're not all paying attention to the same degree. We're not all tuned to it to the same degree. Here's a story that I became familiar with many years ago, and I tried to research it to see if I could completely verify it, and unfortunately wasn't able to. But I want to share this story anyway, and as I do, I want to ask you, if you were this person, and if this were your experience, how would you have responded? Because that's what is at the basis of the idea of listening to and listening for, or listening for and listening to that still small voice. So it's about a young man who was involved in his church, and his church was a more traditional church. He was in Bible class that night, and in Bible class they were talking an awful lot about God speaking and guiding people. And after the class was over, he and some of the folks in his class went out for some coffee, and they were discussing the topic of that evening, of the idea of God's guidance, and does God still speak today? And he was really wrestling with that and really was wondering about it, and so was a little group. And so they were in discussion about it, and then when they finished their coffee and were ready to go home, each going their separate way, this young man sat in his car in the parking lot for a while and was just really deeply questioning, does God still speak to people today? And if God still speaks to people, if there is this presence, then speak to me, God. Speak to me. And so he then left the parking lot. And as he's on his way home, he gets this very strong feeling, go buy a gallon of milk. Now, it's pretty late at night, but there's a grocery store, so he goes and says, all right, this seems kind of weird, but I did just pray, does God still speak? And I'm getting this feeling I should go buy this gallon of milk, so I'll go buy this gallon of milk. So he goes and he buys a gallon of milk, gets back in his car and thinks, great, I listened, right? And he drives further, and then he gets another thought, another feeling that he is to turn down a street that's not the street he would ordinarily turn down to go home. And he's to turn down this street, and now he's arguing in his mind, right? Have you done that at all? Is that you, God, or is this just my mind playing crazy tricks on me? But he decides, well, okay, I guess in his religion, it's about being obedient. And so he says, well, if I'm supposed to be obedient, I guess I better turn down this street. So he turns down this street, and he's driving down, and all of a sudden he gets another feeling that he is to stop the car, and he's to take the gallon of milk to the house across from where he's parked. Now stop for a moment. It's nighttime, and you've just been to Bible class, and you've been, thinking about this idea of, does God still speak to people today? And you get this feeling to buy milk, and you buy milk, and you think, great, I've listened, right? And then you're driving home, but now you've got the same kind of feeling that says, now turn down this road, and you think, okay, well, I'll turn down this road. But then go take the milk to the house. Would you kind of drive home? Some of us might go, okay, that's enough. I think I followed enough. But as the story goes, he decided to go and knock on the door. And now the house is dark, right? And standing there with a gallon of milk. And he knocks on the door, and he's kind of arguing, as the story goes, with God in his mind, please, I knock, I'm going to leave it, I'm going to run before they open the door, or I'm going to get myself, looking really, really stupid. But they come to the door. He hears a commotion. A man comes to the door and says, what do you want? And the guy shoves this gallon of milk to him and says, here, I was supposed to give this to you. And the man turns around, the man that got the gallon of milk, and meets in the hallway his wife, who's carrying a baby, who's crying. And the story is that the man says to the young man that brought the gallon of milk, we were in prayer. We were very short on money, and we weren't able to buy all the food we needed this month, and we were praying for milk. And here, is that true? I don't know. I wish I could verify and tell you absolutely here's the source, but it's a story that even if it's not true, it's beautiful if it is, right? And I believe that those kinds of things can happen, absolutely. But even if we can't prove whether that story is true or not, I think trying to interject ourselves into the storyline and asking ourselves, would we have paid attention? Would we have noticed that feeling, and not just the thought, buy a gallon of milk, But I think that the way that this kind of intuition or this kind of guidance works is it's a thought, but it's also a gut sense. There's something in the body that we feel when that happens. Where would we have been paying attention? Where might we have stopped and said, I don't want to look foolish. This is kind of silly. I'm not going to do this. Would we have gone all the way? Would we have gone all the way? Some of what I know about how God speaks to us is that, and I stumble when I say those words because of the dualistic sense it creates, but some of what I know about how that works is the more I'm willing to pay attention and notice what that feels like in my body when I get, quote, go buy a gallon of milk, the more I become aware of what that sounds like and feels like in my body, and the more willing I am to do whatever that is, the stronger and the louder and the clearer that guidance gets as I go along. It's like tuning in. I never took a music appreciation class, but my husband did in college. And one of the things John would tell me is you were trained to really be able to listen to a piece of classical music and pull out and listen to just a particular instrument. It's a little bit like that as we are paying closer attention to when we do get that thought, that feeling, how does that live in us? And then it's almost as if it's a reward, and I don't like using that word, but I can't think of a better one right now. It's almost like a reward then that we get better and better and more skillful in being able to discern it by virtue of the fact that we're willing to take those first steps. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Just this past week, John, Jennifer, and I decided to watch a movie rather than, we usually have the Food Network on at home. Love to cook. It's a kind of easy break of television when we have it on. But we decided that we were going to watch a movie, and we decided to watch the movie Harriet. John and I had already seen it in the theater when it came out. Jennifer had not seen it. We thought, let's watch the movie Harriet about Harriet Tubman. And, I was struck. I don't even know how to express appreciation for a movie like that. It's not a movie you say, oh, it was a great movie, right? Because of the horrific original sin of our country that it paints for us, right, of enslaving people. But I was struck again by her courage, her strength, her faith, her grit, her how she lived her life in such horrific circumstances, and her commitment to free more than 300 enslaved people. If you have not watched the movie, go watch the movie. It is inspiring, to say the least. But I was struck in watching it a second time, not only about the history of it and not only about what she accomplished, but some of how she accomplished it. If you're familiar with the story, she experienced visions. She had been hurt severely as a young enslaved person, head injury. And some today say, well, she might have had a certain kind of head injury, or maybe it was epilepsy, or some other neurological disaster or condition. But she would suddenly kind of fall into a sleep-like state and then wake up with premonition, wake up with a vision, which often led her to taking a different path in leading enslaved people to their freedom, to avoid danger. And I was struck by that. To me, that was a much more modern day, even though it's not that recent history, example of the power of this presence, this energy, this something that's beyond us but can move through us to guide us, to direct us toward good or away from harm. As I was thinking about Harriet Tubman, I was thinking about Joan of Arc. Remember Joan of Arc? Peasant girl, 13 years old, had visions of saints, had visions and premonitions, and believed that these visions and premonitions were from God, and believed them so much in her faith so deep that she believed that she was to lead the French army in a battle that eventually thwarted the English and helped to free France from the 100-Year War. A vision, a something that perhaps she couldn't explain to herself. And again, modern medicine in hindsight looks and says, well, maybe it was epilepsy. You know, if God is going to speak through that, if God's going to speak through my headaches or through my pain or through my trauma, so be it. Does that really matter? I mean, to me, it doesn't matter. What matters is the paying attention. What matters is the realization that we are more than these physical bodies. We are more than this wonderful mind that we have, that we are an instrument, a channel, a conduit for something greater than what we are. And that in being open to that, we can be an influence for good. We might protect ourselves. We might be able to be guided toward paths of benefit and greatness for ourselves or for others. I'm reminded of my own premonition, probably the most vivid time I've had a premonition, and it was in about 1976, 77. I won't tell you the whole story, but it happened in a Unity church, sitting in like the second row, had been attending Unity for a while, gobbling up everything I could to try to learn and try to feel better about myself and better about my life. And I started to have visions, which scared the heck out of me. And the vision was I was no longer sitting where you're sitting. I was standing up here doing what I'm doing now. And that was not anything I wanted any part of whatsoever. But it kept happening. It kept happening. And I pushed it down, pushed it down. What happens when you push something down? Have you ever pushed down a beach ball in like a swimming pool or in the ocean? Right? Kind of fun, right? But what happens the minute you let go of pushing it down? It pops up with a fury. It pops up with a fury. Mine popped up with a fury in nightmares that I would actually be doing what I'm doing. And there's a whole other part of the story. But the vision, the premonition, and I think for me, it was because I was reluctant. There was no way I would have chosen this path on my own for many, many different reasons. But I do sincerely believe it's been the right path for me. And I do sincerely believe that in my pursuing the path, that I've been able to at least bring some comfort or some spiritual support to people along the way. Thank you. That's very sweet. I didn't share it for that reason, but thank you. But it had to come through something because I wasn't willing. Hopefully you're a lot more willing than I am. Hopefully you're a lot more willing. So what does God sound like? What does Spirit sound like? Is that you, God? Is that you, God? Sometimes it is that still small voice. Sometimes it really is like a whisper. Just something that you hear, you actually hear it, and it feels different and sounds different than any other voice you've heard before. Doesn't sound like your mother or your mother-in-law or your father or whoever might have been a difficult person in your life or something painful. It doesn't sound like that. It sounds different. There's a clarity to it. There's a part of you that just recognizes it. Sometimes it's that still small voice. Sometimes it's a quiet, pestering thought. Oh, your giggle tells me that you've had those. A quiet, pestering thought with, I'm going to suggest, a sense in the body. If you're paying attention, it's not just the quiet, pestering thought that just won't let you go, but you feel it somewhere in your body. Not every thought that we think, especially thoughts that we think casually, do we even notice how it feels in our body? I suppose we could if we paid really close attention. But this kind that I'm talking about is quiet, but it's pestering. It's kind of annoying because it's trying to get your attention, and you feel it somewhere. Like the story of the young man at the milk, right? Didn't make any sense, but felt like something was pestering him, do this, do this, do this. And sometimes it can be a vision. Sometimes you just see it before it happens. That can be scary if you've never experienced that before. But play with it. If it does happen to you, don't just dismiss it. Be curious about it. Journal about it. Talk to somebody about it. Inquire about it. You don't have to act upon it immediately. I was very slow to take any action. That's why the premonition had to find another outlet, and that outlet was a nightmare, right? A recurring. So when it's God, when it's, maybe this is a different way of saying it, when it's a message that's really meant for you, for your soul's journey, it's not going to let you go. You might get really good at ignoring it and find all sorts of ways to try to shut it out, but it will still be there. If it is a message for your soul, it will still be there. It will not let you go, like Jacob wrestling with the angel. I will not let you go until you bless me. I will not let you go until you bless me. As I wrap this up, a few ideas on how to get better at knowing for yourself, is that you, God? I begin by saying, pay attention. Just pay attention. Pay attention to those pestering thoughts. Pay attention to that gut feeling, that hunch. And when I say pay attention to it, pay attention to what it is, but pay attention to how it feels. Because you need to become an expert in how it lives in you. Does that make sense? You need to become an expert in how it lives in you. And the only way I know to do that, I can't tell you how it lives in you. I can tell you how it lives in me, but that may not be the same for you. The only way you will get to know how it lives in you is by you paying attention and noticing, what does that feel like? What does that sound like? Another is to expect it to happen. Expect guidance to happen. Expect that you can be a conduit for greater insight and wisdom than just what seems to come from your own best thinking. Expect it. Talk to God. Whatever you think of when I say God, talk to that energy, that life force. As you get better at paying attention to it, recognizing how it feels inside of you, begin to act upon it. Begin to act upon it. A little bit of a, what's the word I'm looking for here? Can't think of the word. I would not suggest, if you are new to this, I would not suggest that if there is this hunch that you should suddenly leave the life you've known for the last 50 years, divorce your spouse, go to another part of the world. Don't start there. Did I paint a good enough picture there? Don't start there. This is a journey, I think, of becoming more spiritually skillful with yourself. And so start in the smaller, easier, more immediate places where the consequences of if it's not your divine guidance are not going to be so great. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So please don't go home and tell your beloved spouse that you just had an argument with that Wendy said you're going to go get a divorce and you're going to quit your job and you're going to go live in Antarctica. Please don't do that, okay? All righty. And then two other things. Let your motivation be to be helpful. Let your motivation be to be helpful. I know that when I have prayed for guidance and clarity, that it always seems to come easier for me when it's not about me and it's about someone or something else. Just a thought to plant there. And the last, which is what I was pointing to just a few moments ago, but saying take it with baby steps first. Check it out. Listen for that still small voice, but then also listen to it. Take a step in that direction. If you get guidance to go buy a gallon of milk today, go buy a gallon of milk. Just go buy a gallon. You might be the answer to somebody's prayer. I do think that that's one of the ways that God, that Spirit, works in the world to help us be answers to each other's prayer and each other's healing. God bless you and namaste.